All right, guys, welcome back to Unit 4 now. So we've finished up with Unit 3, move ahead to Unit 4. So our focus changes now. Unit 4 is all about transforming a business. Outcome 1 in Unit 4, the first of two outcomes on reviewing performance. And this video is covering the first two key knowledge dot points, 1 and 2 in the first outcome. So here is our study design for outcome 1 as always, and you can see there that's what we're covering off in this particular video. But first off, just by way of a bit of an introduction, like I say, to the whole unit and what we're doing in each of the outcomes, just to kind of put what we're going to be doing, I guess, in some context. So Unit 3 was all about managing a business, okay? So after we got through the first outcome, which Business Foundations just laid some basic stuff, a bunch of kind of largely unrelated topics, but just setting some foundations to get some sort of understanding of business and how it operates, so on and so forth. Then we went on to managing employees and then managing operations. So really the focus of that Unit 3 was about actually managing a business, so employees and then the operations function. So Unit 4, like I said, the focus changes and it's all about transforming a business, transforming meaning changing effectively. Okay, so this is all about change management. So outcome 1 is about reviewing the performance of a business and identifying the need for change or the need for that transformation. So that's what we're going to be doing in the next few weeks. And then outcome 2, which although they're weighted 50-50, there's more content in outcome 2. That's all about actually taking a business through change. Okay, so implementing the change itself. Okay, taking us through some of the processes that managers can use to guide the business successfully through a change process. So outcome 1, just identifying the need for change in a business, and then outcome 2, actually how we manage that change within the business. That's kind of how this is structured, okay? So that's the outcomes, that's the unit and the outcome breakdown. So back now to what we're looking at in this particular video. So like I said, the first two key knowledge dot points of outcome 1, the concept of business change, and the second dot point there, something called proactive and reactive approaches to change, okay? So we combine the two. That second key knowledge dot point is a real quick one, which we'll cover at the end of this video. But the main focus of this video is to get you to understand this whole idea about what business change is and why it happens, really. I mean, you can see there, like they're pretty short dot points. VCAR doesn't say much about them. You know, there's no script within them. Quite vague, not a lot of direction, particularly with that first key knowledge dot point, just the concept of business change. So what I'm going to do here in this video is cover a few things that I think is going to help us get started with the whole concept of business change. So what I'm going to do is structure it in this way. First off, we're going to look at, what we mean by business change. What does that actually mean? Secondly, why is it that businesses actually change? And I'll give you lots of examples to help you understand and sort of drive that point home, help you understand why it is that businesses need to change, because it is really important that they do. Okay, and by the end of this video, I think you'll get the gist of that. And then thirdly, proactive and reactive approaches to change, which was that second key knowledge dot point. And then fourthly, just why this is such an important business issue, which is then going to kind of set us up for kind of some of the later stuff that we do. So that's what we're going to go through in this video here from this point, okay? So first off, what is business change, okay? If you had to define it, so there is a definition of business change. There's lots of different definitions, but that one would work. So any alteration that is made to a business and the work environment. That might include changes to behaviors, changes to policies or processes, particular practices that happen in the business, basically changes to anything within our business, okay? Now, these changes might impact the entire business, or they might impact just parts of the business. So, for example, if we're going to introduce some automation to the production line, think back to your Colt, that's really only going to directly impact those working in operations, okay? But if the change was, okay, we're going to move from paying you an award wage to an enterprise bargain agreement, that's something that is going to impact all employees. So when we're talking about change, depending on what the change is, it can either be really kind of widespread across the entire business. It might impact only a few people, might impact a certain team. So it's important to remember when we're talking about change, it kind of impacts on different levels of the business. It's not always the entire business, but it can be. Also worth noting that the outcomes, or basically the result of the change that we are going to make, it can be both positive and negative. The reality is that, I've been through lots and lots of business change in my time. There's always both, okay? There's always some positives that come out of it. There's always some negatives. Not necessarily, everybody might not agree on the positive and negatives, but if you take individual people, some people are going to see some positives, some people are going to see some negatives. But the whole point of this is, it's really essential that the change is managed in an appropriate way. You don't want the outcome to be seen by the key stakeholders involved in the change as being negative, okay? The reason we're making the change, obviously, is going to be for positive reasons. And we kind of get onto that a bit later in this particular outcome when we talk about driving and restraining forces. But it's really, really key that the whole process is managed in the right way. And like I say, that is more the focus of outcome 2 when we look at how change is managed within a business. So why do businesses change? Okay. Fundamentally, as a result of pressure from the various business environments. Now, if you did year 11, that little image in front of you should seem familiar, but if you didn't, it doesn't necessarily matter. I guess, look, when you're answering questions on this topic, you can, if you remember back to year 11, you can remember how to do this. You can frame your answers using the language of macro environment, operating environment, and internal environment. You don't have to. So if you didn't do year 11, that's not going to be so familiar to you. But basically what we're looking at here is, if we look at that, so we've got 3 levels basically, or 3 rings here. Okay, the middle ring where it says internal, this is where we looked at in outcome 1.3 last year, just a heads up. So the internal, that means the business itself. So that middle pinky type ring, that is the business. Okay, so the internal environment, when we talk about various business environments, the internal environment is referring to the business itself. Okay. The second darker yellow ring is the first of our external environment. So the operating environment is external to the business, but that consists of elements or factors. You can see 4 in there, those 4 elements, the blue ones. They are external to the business, but they are elements or factors, you can use either word, which they're external to the business, but we have some degree of interaction with them. And therefore, it is said that we have some degree of control over them. Now, you don't need to frame your answers in this language, like I said, but if you did year 11, it can be useful just to make the connections back and frame it in this way. And then we move to the macro environment, which is also external. But if you look at the sort of things that are in there, those elements or those factors, you're not interacting with them. These are just basically things that exist in the broader business world, or even the world in general, which businesses need to be aware of and respond to. We have no control over them. Okay, within our business, we have no control over legal and government, the laws and the regulations that are set. We have no control over society's attitudes and values, the economic conditions which we're operating in. But all of these things, we need to be aware of them and we need to respond to them. And I'll talk about some of these in a little bit more detail in a minute. That'll put that in some context and you will understand. If you didn't really get that, that's not a big issue. We'll take each of these in turn and I think it'll give you enough understanding of what we're talking about here. So, for example, what I'm going to do here is take some of those elements. So one of the elements that was in the external macro environment there was, it said legal and government, okay? This is really talking about laws. So the thing or the issue or something to be aware of from a business point of view is laws are not static, okay? Laws don't just sit there and never change, okay? Constantly, laws are being amended, they're being updated, new laws are being introduced all the time, and it's really important that within our business, we're aware of any changes in the law or government regulations and respond to those changes so that we do not risk becoming non-compliant, okay? Because if, as a business owner or a business manager, we are found to be breaking the law, just like in life, there's penalties, there's consequences. And those can include pretty extensive fines. And depending on the law that's being broken, it can even involve doing jail time for owners, directors of businesses. So it's really important that this, and why do businesses change? This is what we're talking about. It might be necessary for changes to be made within our business if certain laws are changed so that we stay compliant and we stay operating within the law. That's kind of the point of this from that perspective. Okay, so we must always be aware of all the laws, all the regulations that apply to our particular business and make any changes necessary within our business to make sure that we stay legal, we stay compliant with all of those laws and regulations at all times. Another one of those elements in the macro environment, so the outer ring, was economic conditions. And again, we have no control over these when running a business, but you need to be aware of them, okay? Interest rates, inflation, unemployment rates, exchange rates, all of these sort of things, which are part of economic conditions. Again, these things are not static, okay? And they can have a really, really big influence on the ability of a business to achieve its objectives. In other words, make money, okay? Businesses need to be aware of what changes are happening to all of those things and then make changes within the business accordingly. So, for example, and this is really key right now, as I'm recording this in mid-June 2023, you know, the economy has been huge news this last 6-12 months because interest rates have been increasing, inflation is increasing, the cost of living is increasing, and all of those things businesses cannot ignore. I mean, interest rates alone, you know, a lot of businesses will have huge loans, okay? Whether that was to start the business originally or to expand the business, whatever the reason may be that the business has loans, but businesses often have very, very big loans sitting there that they're paying back over time. Well, right now, the repayments on those loans are going to be much, much higher than what they would have been 12 months ago. So if you're suddenly having to repay much more money back to the bank every month to repay your loan, you might need to make some changes within your business to account for that. So for example, your costs have increased. You might need to reduce costs somewhere else in the business to kind of offset that. Or you might need to make some other changes to bring more revenue in, for example, to offset that extra cost. Unemployment rates you need to be aware of because, look, if the unemployment rate is really low, in other words, most people out there have a job, when you need to find employees, that can be really, really hard because there's not many people looking for jobs. Again, that's something you need to be aware of. If you're looking to expand your business, you're going to need employees. Very useful to know where the unemployment rate is sitting at and what the chances are that you are going to be able to find the employees that you need to kind of assist that change, that growth. All of these things. Exchange rates. If you are dealing with other countries, either in terms of selling your product or your service overseas, or if you're bringing resources in from overseas, as the exchange rates fluctuate, those resources then become more or less expensive. If you're selling to overseas countries, as the exchange rates fluctuate, your products then either become more or less expensive to people in those countries. So again, all of this stuff we need to be on top of and maybe making changes within our business to account for all of this stuff that's happening around us, which we can't control, but we need to be aware of and react and respond to. Technological issues, look, a huge one, okay? Technology is constantly evolving, okay? what technology is available and relevant for your type of business, okay? Can you get in early ahead of your competitors with this, okay, and get some competitive advantage by using new technology before them, okay? On the flip of that, if your competitors implement the new technology before you do, there's a chance that you then might become uncompetitive yourself. So again, what's happening in the technology world is not something as a business owner that we control, but we need to be aware of it, and we need to be responding and reacting and implementing whatever is relevant in our business. Corporate social responsibility, again, this theme that runs through and through the entire year 11 and 12 course. Again, something in the macro environment, we have no control over it, but basically these days there is pressure coming from society at large with regard to social responsible practices that businesses need to take into account of to maintain a reputation. We've talked about this lots already. That's not a new concept to you. Okay, so businesses need to be being seen to be doing the right thing, to be ethical, to be implementing CSR. Again, are your competitors introducing some new CSR measures which are going to be looked upon favourably by the community and therefore your customers? Do you need to implement similar changes or do even more to get ahead of them? Again, it's all about making changes within the business to account for these changes that are happening in society. Trends in society, and look, CSR is one of these trends, but you need to be aware of all of the trends, okay? Does your product or your service buck the trend of what's becoming popular in society? Is your product or service relevant any longer? Is it what people are still looking for? Do you need to make some adjustments to your portfolio of products, okay? We'll look in a little bit more detail later about Macca's introduction of the healthy options over the years. Okay, that's a direct response to the trend in society for people to be more aware of what they're putting in their bodies, what they're eating. So they introduce these healthy options, and I do healthy, you know why I'm doing that, because if you actually look at it, a lot of those healthy options really aren't that healthy, but it's the way they're marketed. But regardless, those changes have been made to their menus in response to this trend in society. And there's lots and lots of trends, you know, trends are always changing. Again, the point of this is as a business, we need to be aware of whatever trends are and make changes to make sure we're staying on trend, okay? Customers, so we're coming into the operating environment, the circle or the ring just around outside the business. So we obviously interact with our customers. So have you had feedback from your customers that there are some issues with your product offerings? Okay. If so, obviously we might need to make some changes to our products to make sure that those customers remain happy, remain satisfied. Are there some ways in which your customers' needs or wants are not being met? So do we need to make some changes to make sure that we are meeting those needs and those wants? Do you need to actually address these things to retain these customers? If you do not make these changes and, you know, deal with any issues with your products, don't address their needs or wants, are you going to lose those customers to competitors? If so, obviously, we need to make some changes. Suppliers, again, from the operating environment, we deal with, we interact with, we liaise with our suppliers. Has your current supplier actually gone out of business? Okay, that's pretty dramatic. Okay, if so, obviously, the change we need to make pretty damn quick is to find a new supplier. Okay, have you discovered that an overseas supplier has been operating in an unethical way towards its workers? Okay, so we know by now that particularly in Australia, we deal with China a lot, for example. Now, historically, a lot of these Chinese suppliers, there's been questions around the ethics of the way that they treat some of their workers, not just China, but a lot of countries up in Asia that we deal with because of our proximity to Asia. So it's really important that we are aware of what's going on from an ethical point of view, not just within our own business, but in the businesses that supply to us as well. Because at the end of the day, if there's an ethical issue with one of your suppliers, word gets out, then often that means that your business can also kind of get tarred with the same brush because they supplied to you. So do you need to make changes? Again, do you need to find an alternative supplier? Okay. Is your supply becoming unreliable, okay, with their deliveries? For example, if you're using just in time, we know that it's really, really important. Just in time is only going to work if these smaller, more frequent deliveries arrive at the right time. If you find over a period of time that suddenly your supply is not keeping to that schedule, you're not getting your deliveries either in the right quantity or at the right time, it might mean that your whole just-in-time system falls apart, which means, it impacts your business pretty heavily. You might not be able to produce your product. They're not meeting customer demand. You're going to lose customers, profit, blah, 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 blah. So again, does that mean you need to start looking for an alternative supplier? You can see there's so many different things to think about. This all gets very, very complex. Now, coming back within the business, employees. Okay, so that's your main element within the business. This is the internal environment. Have you noticed that morale within your business has taken a bit of a nosedive? People coming into work not happy, not as happy as they were. Okay, complaints from employees on the up. Okay, if so, we need to do some investigating and find out what is going on within our business. Why are people, not happy or less happy than they were? We need to address those changes. Okay, are we about to enter a new enterprise bargaining process to set up a new agreement? And there's now pressure coming from employees and maybe the unions even for an increase in wages. Okay, so again, something we need to take into account. We might need to make changes within the business to account for that increase in wages that we may have to pay. Are there gaps in performance with the employees? Does that need to be addressed? We need to make some changes within the business to make sure that the employees are performing at the level that we need them to be performing at. Okay. So again, actually, think as I'm talking through this, I'm realizing even now that so much of this stuff actually touches on stuff that we've done previously in the course, or you can make links or connections back to other earlier parts of the course. Now, look, it might be a bit of a weird one, but all of this responding to these pressures. So if you think about that diagram again with the internal environment, the business, the operating environment, and the macro environment. So basically, I think back, I don't know, make this connection in my own head. I don't know if you're aware of this game. This is a video game from about the 1980s, early 80s. It was one of the first video games, Space Invaders. This is called Asteroids. This game reminds me of kind of how a business needs to operate. Okay, so this is the game in action. Right in the middle there, you see that little triangle? That's your spaceship. And basically what you're doing in this game, you've got to maneuver your spaceship around and basically not get hit by these asteroids that are flying all around you. Okay, you get out of the way and you can shoot them to kill them. Think of those asteroids. That's all those elements around the business that are kind of flying around and changing. And you're the spaceship. The business is the spaceship in the middle. Okay, what you're doing is constantly turning around, looking around at all these different elements. And as changes are kind of coming and hitting you, you've got to deal with them before they hit you. Okay, so that game is kind of that. I always visualize this whole thing like this. Okay, a game of asteroids. Okay, you're in the middle. There's so much stuff going on around you. You can't just ignore it. If that spaceship just sat in the middle and stayed the same and didn't change its direction, its path, it's going to get killed. And it's the same for businesses. If they just sit in the middle of all this stuff going on in the world around them, they're going to die. And look, history is full of businesses which have failed to change and then ultimately failed. So to me, I don't know if for me that little connection works. It's just a way of kind of visualizing how this kind of works and kind of how important it is that businesses don't just sit in the middle there and just let things happen without responding or reacting. A couple of actual examples, just to put this into some more context for you. Take Coca-Cola, okay? Obviously, we know Coca-Cola, very successful business, established in 1892, so 130, 40 years ago, whatever that is. One drink, okay, the original Coca-Cola drink. Today, they have over 3,500 products operating under 500 different brand names in over 200 countries. So obviously, they've expanded somewhat. Okay. Now, if you just go to the Australian Coca-Cola website, You can see there 80 years of Coke being made in Australia, 130 years refreshing world, yeah, whatever. But then we move on. 165 different drinks under 25 brands. And here's some of these brands. We've obviously got Coke, Sprite, Powerade, Pump Water, Barista Coffee, juices. So you can see what they've done there. Now, rather than just sticking with one drinks brand, the original Coca-Cola, which, is deemed to be not a particularly healthy drink. So you can see, if you think about those brands, they now have kind of got themselves into every beverage market. Okay, so they've got into waters, they've got into juices, they've got into energy drinks, they've gone into the kind of prepackaged coffee. Okay, and again, the reason they've done this, obviously they're expanding and growing, but they're going into markets which have become, if we go back to society's trends, okay, people got into bottled water, at some point many years ago. Like when I was a kid, bottled water was not a thing. Okay, so in the 1980s, no one would come to school with a bottle of water, right? At some point between then and now, bottled water became a thing. And Coca-Cola, like, right, we need to be in on that market. So they've made changes. I think a lot of those brands that you see, they have all these brands, they've bought the brands, haven't developed them, but they've basically kind of capitalized when trends have become. So again, another trend has been the energy drinks. Okay, there's so many Gatorade, Powerade, there's so many different versions, and Coca-Cola have several energy drink brands under its umbrella. So Coca-Cola have been very, very good at growing, but whilst they're growing, they're adapting to the trends that are going on at one particular time and making sure they have a portfolio of products that kind of meets that trend, or meets the needs and wants of the consumers that are looking for that particular type of product. Take Macca's. Okay, so what you're seeing there is that would be a menu board from one of the very, very early days of McDonald's. Okay, when McDonald's started in the 50s in the US, a very, very simple menu. Okay, actually more simple than this. This would have been one of the sort of first evolutions of a menu, but this probably relates, I'm guessing, to maybe the 1960s or something. So this is a very early McDonald's menu. By the time I was working McDonald's and running a bunch of stores in the mid-90s, the menu looked a little bit more like this, so it expanded. So you can see there's different menu items on there that will, meet different customer needs. So for example, a fillet of fish. Okay, fillet of fish was not on the original menu. When you're operating, so I was operating restaurants in Manchester. There was a fairly big population of immigrants who could not eat beef, but they could eat fish. So, we used to sell a lot of those, and that would be the same across the UK. So again, it's responding to changes in society, coming up with products and services that meet the needs of certain sets of society or customers. And that's kind of what this is all about. If you take that to now, a menu in Macca's looks something like this. There are so many different menu items now. I mean, to be honest, to me, I just find it confusing. There's so much to choose from. So again, this is how the menu has evolved over time, responding to what's going on in society. And again, coming back to mention before, the healthy items, okay? So this is a relatively recent, in the history of McDonald's anyway, addition, the salads, wraps, this sort of stuff. Because if McDonald's just ploughed on with their non-healthy menu, they would have lost a lot of customers, because there's people now care more about what they eat. And even as a family, you could go now and mum and dad might want something more healthy, whereas they get the cheeseburger or the nuggets and chips or whatever for the kids. But if they didn't do the healthy options, a family might not go to to a Macca's. They might choose something else. So again, this is all about responding to what's going on in the world around us, making changes in our business. In this example, making changes to the product offerings to respond to those changes. And then, even more later, they're responding to technology. So, you have the My Macca's app now. that this technology is now available, so let's exploit that, and it's a way to get other customers, or to make it easier for existing customers to buy more frequently from you. It links to the rewards as well. You've got the ordering screens in the restaurants, hooking in with Uber Eats, and even doing delivery themselves. So again, these are all evolutions within the McDonald's business. These were not here, 15 years ago, probably not even 10 years ago. But they're here now. They're responding to customers' needs. Customers want changes that are going in society to maintain a very successful business. Now, just putting here now, some of this might be repetitive. We've kind of talked about this, but I'm just thinking back to some examples of change as sort of things you might see in case studies and get questions on. So thinking about questions I've seen in the past, okay? So some examples of things that you might see in case studies, which are going to be cause for a business to need to change. Okay, so these are just some common ones. So poor financial performance. So in other words, if the business is not performing well from a financial point of view, in other words, profit, it's either making a loss or they're not making as much profit as they were forecasting they would make, you might need to make changes to cut costs to remain profitable or even to survive. Okay, that's a really, really common one. Employees is another common one we see. Employees demanding changes in terms and conditions and work. So that can be what's generating or driving the need for the change. Innovation, businesses may be forced to find new ways to enhance operations, to remain competitive. And again, we've just seen some examples of all of this stuff. Well, certainly that one, just in practice with the McDonald's there. Technology is the same. Changes in technology in broader society might require firms to change in order to remain competitive. We've said that already. Economic forces, so the state of the economy can influence change. Changes in the strength of the Aussie dollar compared with other currencies affects the affordability of Aussie-made products for overseas buyers. Already kind of mentioned that one. And legal forces, minimum wage, penalty rate changes, that sort of thing. So again, minimum wage. So if each year minimum wages are reset by the government, you need to be aware of this, because if you continue paying the minimum wage or the award rate that applies to your industry that applied last year, you're then going to be falling foul of the law. Penalty rates. So if they change, public holiday rates, Sunday rates and stuff, again, if you're not aware of that and you don't pay your employees, you can get in big trouble. So yeah, these are just some of I'm just thinking of the real typical examples that we see in questions, just so you're kind of prepared for the kind of issues that you might see. Now, categorizing change, so kind of changing direction a little bit here. Again, because the key knowledge dot point is so vague, I'm just kind of throwing a whole bunch of stuff around here that I just think is worth knowing about, thinking about past questions I've seen, just to kind of throw it all in this key knowledge dot point before the later key knowledge dot points get a bit more specific, just so that we're kind of covering everything I think we need to cover. So look, business can change in lots of different ways. Okay, we've just seen, we've given lots of examples, but reality is it's an endless list of reasons, right? But there's two broad ways in which we can categorize how the change is going to happen, okay? Incremental change, which is where there is small continuous changes going on, okay? So the business is constantly making small adjustments, little tweaks, refining processes to achieve productivity gains, for example. That's deemed to be incremental change. Then we have transformational change, which is significant large-scale changes, often impacting the entire business, but not necessarily. So, for example, if we're restructuring a company, if we're going to merge with another business, introducing completely new products or services. So this is kind of the big picture stuff. That clearly is more impactful in kind of a short space of time. That's what we call transformational change. And actually, to be honest, a lot of the case studies that we see, more focus is probably on the transformational change, but it's just worth being aware that in your notes that these two things exist. It might come in handy somewhere. Now we're getting on to that second key knowledge dot point. I said this is a real quick one, right? So it said proactive and reactive approaches. Again, look, this is real simple, okay? When managing the process of change, businesses can take one of two approaches, okay? They can be reactive. okay, which means they are just literally waiting for those business environments to impact the business before making the changes. Or we could be proactive, which means we are constantly looking in and outside of the business, all of those business environments and all those different elements and factors that kind of exist within them, and foreseeing changes in those environments, okay? Then we have the opportunity to take advantage of any changes early and avoid any future problems. So going back to our asteroids game, it's, the reactive approach would literally just be sitting in the middle, waiting for an asteroid to hit, and then dealing with that particular issue. Whereas think about how you saw the games being played. The spaceship is moving around, it's shooting. That's being proactive. Generally, obviously, a proactive approach is going to be better, okay? Because you're dealing with stuff early. You're getting in early, particularly if the competition is being reactive. So as a general strategy, businesses constantly want to be being proactive, which means constantly looking in and outside the business, all of those environments, foreseeing, trying to predict, being across changes that might happen, and being ready or getting in even before the changes happen, certainly before your competitors have made the changes, okay? The only time really you want to be being reactive is in the case of something really unexpected happening or some kind of a crisis, okay? Then you might need to jump into kind of reactive mode and do what you need to do to deal with that situation. But on an ongoing basis, we want to be being proactive as much as possible, okay? I think this is the last thing I'm talking about. Why is change such an important business issue and one that basically gets its own unit? Okay, Unit 4 is all about change. Why does it get its own unit? Okay, why is it so important? Okay, now we've seen in this video, and I think I've demonstrated by now, that change is constant. That's a funny term in itself. Constant means not changing, but change means changing. Think about what that actually means. Change is constant means change is always happening, okay? In the business world, things are always moving, always changing. And in the world in general, yeah? Because businesses operate in the world in general. Businesses cannot avoid that, okay? And those that that do ignore those changes are going to cease to exist. Again, think back to the asteroids game. Sit in the middle, do nothing, bang, you're gone. If you move around, keep mobile, keep nimble, being aware of what's going on and reacting to it, then you survive. The problem is, okay, this is why it's important. The problem is that change in a business is not an easy thing, not an easy process to manage, okay? It's really difficult to get it right. But as we now know, if business managers, business owners do not get it right, then the business is basically at risk. Therefore, managers, owners, business leaders must be committed to any change that is being made, and they must have the skills and the knowledge to ensure that the change happens as smoothly as it possibly can, okay? Now, one of the key reasons that managing change is difficult, it's such a hard thing to get right, is to do with people, okay? Fundamentally, most people struggle with change, okay? People just like being in their lane, being in their comfort zone. Change is uncomfortable for a lot of people. People struggle with it. So in order to get the whole change right, it's important to consider the effect of any proposed change on people, okay? Now, these might be internal people, so in other words, our employees. There might be external customers, the local community even. To be honest, a lot of this is more focused internally. It's managing your employees through change. But it is important to be aware that other people, external to the business, like customers and suppliers, local community, can also be impacted by changes. But most of what we talk about really is focused on the employees. Now, the reality is that the reactions to change are going to vary, okay? But really common reactions amongst employees is for them to feel anxious or nervous about the change that's being made. They might be unsure about the impact of the change on their own job. People might be afraid of failing. People might be disoriented and uncertain about the future, okay? Change is uncertain. Change is uncomfortable. So look, there's other things, but that's like a good little summary of the type of reactions that you often get. Now, because of that, that's what makes the need to manage change so important. Okay. They're difficult things to deal with because at the end of the day, all of those things essentially lead to resistance to the change. So when you are managing a change process, you're going to come up against resistance. And we talk more about that in later videos in this particular outcome, but then more about strategies in how to deal with that in the second outcome in Unit 4. Okay, so that finishes the video. So hopefully by now you've got some idea of what we mean by business change, I'd say the reasons that businesses need to change, the importance of getting it right, that sort of thing. So hopefully you've got a really good set of notes. I will see you in the next Key Knowledge dot point. Cheers for now.